Okay, this meeting is being convened in accordance with recent amendments to the open meetings law, which allow for this virtual format without any in-person attendance requirements. We do have a quorum of the board present via Zoom tonight. The meeting is being videotaped and will be available for viewing after the meeting. There'll be a transcript available. And this may be our last meeting in this full virtual format. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chairman Kirkwood.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Always something to look forward to. There we go. All right, we're here. It is April 5, and our first item is an informal appearance before the board. This is our second look at MIDAS Main Street Lot Corp. This is number 90 Inningwood Road. This is an application for a site development plan, steep slopes, and tree removal. So we last heard this back on November 16. At that time, we urged the applicant to take a look at and try to change the configuration of the house on the lot itself, trying to work more with the grade. And so we have those revised figures and drawings here, and so we'll go right into it. So perhaps the applicant can lead us with the changes, and I think at this point, admittedly, we don't have all the information because I think the applicant's looking for guidance on this configuration before they start spending more time, more money in terms of some of the details that are going to be important for this application.
Yeah, I can go now. Good.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Please.
Yeah. So that's correct. There's a lot of stormwater comments putting together SWIP. It's actually, a lot of hours to put into that and create that. So we just didn't want to pull the trigger on that if everything's going to change again. And as you mentioned, we did change the house. There was a concern the house wasn't facing the road, which now it is facing the road. We feel it's a better house that the architect created. We are reducing some of our disturbances by 117 square feet. I know it's not much, but it is reducing it. And we are also reducing the trees by 6 trees. So we're saving 6 trees by moving the layout. I'll just share the layout so everybody, I'm able to share my screen.
Yes, please. Thank you.
So this is the new layout. As you can see now, the house actually faces the road. We did shorten the driveway a bit. There was also a concern about the size we had a big turnaround area. Somebody had noted that. So we just gave a little bump out just to turn a car around to come down the driveway. So we reduced a bit of that asphalt. The other thing is that I want to note is the access drive. We did now show grading for the access drive. And we did supply information showing that the machine we are using can traverse that.
So as graded out, what are those grades on that construction road when you get to that steep area?
This is 33%.
Okay, thank you.
The machine can handle, I think, up to 70% straight on, 35% if the machine was on its side. So now we have the backyard, which is behind the house. You actually get better privacy. So, we feel this is, I appreciate the input because I think we did churn out a much better product than we came before you the first time. And the other thing I just want to note, we did look at increasing the sight distances for cars. The road itself is signposted at 25 miles an hour. So we looked at the 35 mile an hour, and this increased to 250 feet for the sight distance. The uphill doesn't have to be as much. I think I calculated it had to be around 115 feet, but we kept the 200 on the uphill for the sight line. And I believe that those are the only items we changed. Of course, this wall in the front is now a lot smaller than it was when we had a backyard here.
Can you tell us about the walls that you've got proposed here, the height, length?
Sure, yeah.
And by the way, overall, is there are there fewer walls and less wall, footage here than the previous drawings?
Yeah, well, I guess what I could say is in the front, we have it's a lot smaller wall in size wise, but it's still about 12 feet in the front here. Before we had 20 plus, it was a lot further down the hill. In the back, because the site has so much rock, we're proposing a rock cut, an 8-on-1 rock cut. But as the engineer as the town engineer mentioned, once we get out there to construct this, we'll have a geotech present reporting on this. And if a wall is required, we're going to then have to provide wall plans if the rock is not dense enough. And then we have a small little wall here just to break up this pathway to get down into here. And I believe that's only about 10 feet here. Hold on. And then it reduces down to nothing here. I think that's the only thing that changed. We kept the entrance where it was. And we kept the stormwater treatment systems where it is for now, but we're going to have to design that to the new standards.
Right. In the back behind the house, it seems that the architectural plans are for a walkout basement. And it seemed that might cause even more, flattening and cutting than we would normally see if we didn't have a walkout basement. Is that the case, or is that not the case?
Yes, this is a walkout basement, which we're required to cut down to grade. So I'll just bring up if I can, just gonna switch over to the previous plan that we had before you, where we had the walkout here, and we actually filled the whole site to get that to walk out. On this new layout, we're gonna cut to walk out.
Is the walkout basement therefore some sort of critical design element that the owner needs or wants here? It seems to be creating more cut than we would normally see. In this case, Phil, in the last case. Yeah.
I don't know if our architect's here, Lou Damasi, if he wants to speak a little bit on the house. Lou, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Here.
Does everyone hear me okay?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought the walkout was a naturally occurring thing with the natural topography, but if it's a forced thing, we could look at maybe raising up that grade. But I do, for code reasons, we want to have some natural egress for a basement in case they ever do want to finish that part of the basement. So, it's always desirable to have a walkout to get to a pool site or a level spot. But if it's something that it's causing a little bit of chaos, we could look into like regrading that and have more of a walk up instead of a walk out.
Okay.
Yeah, because what happens if you lift the house to get the walkout, you wind up with a massive wall in the front yard because now you're lifting the house onto the hillside.
Right.
So we tried to find that common ground without filling too much in the front, because that's what people are going to see as they're driving by as well. We didn't want them to look at a huge wall across the whole front of the house.
Okay. So why don't we run through the comments that we have from our staff? Sabrina, do you want to run through yours?
Sure. I can start out by saying, just to give the board a sense of the changes in regards to the house's reorientation. You can see in the plan that the house was previously positioned in an east-west configuration on the lot. And now it's really shifted to be in a north-south configuration as it faces the roadway where the driveway is proposed. The house size based on this layout has increased by approximately 629 square feet. and the development coverage has been reduced by 2,197 square feet. So there's just been some changes based on this shifting in orientation. The shift has also caused changes in front, side, and rear yard setbacks. And additional steep slope areas have been quantified, as well as disturbances within the steep slopes have changed. So that's just kind of a general summary of the differences between what you looked at before and what you're looking at now. It still remains to be a type 2 action in accordance with SECRA, and it's still zoning compliant, if you will. There hasn't been any changes which have changed its compliance to zoning. Is just a matter of verifying that the measurements are correct in the zoning conformance table at the end of the day when you have all decided on a layout. I think that, as was discussed previously, the applicant has some more work to do. The clearing and grading limit line on the plans that were submitted was very hard to decipher. Anthony, I don't know if you can darken that line or kind of differentiate it a little bit. It was difficult to follow because I believe that changes to the clearing and grading limit line are being proposed as part of the application. Other than that, it's a matter of the board giving the applicant direction as to whether or not this layout meets with your discussion at your last meeting, and then determining, how the stormwater plays out in relation to the selected layout. And then you can move forward with a public hearing. But it's really, I go back to the board and saying, that we have to get over the first hurdle of the layout to really determine where the house meets the town's codes. There's plenty of room on the property within the zoning district for it to be zoning compliant. And so I don't see any changes that would alter that.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep.
So on the setbacks, so the setbacks are off of the property line, even though we have a very substantial piece of property between the private property line and, of course, Inningwood Road. Another issue that I think Jen will speak to in terms of the ownership of that, but it's very different from what we normally see. Normally, the 75-foot, for example, in this case, setback really is the property line, and it's very often very close to the road, if not the road itself. Yeah, exactly. So that's an interesting problem or constraint they have. So that corner, what the northeast corner is right at the 75-foot line, right at the 75-foot point. How about the rear setback? Is that it's cut off at the top? Is that the 40-foot? What's that?
67 feet.
Okay, and the requirement is what?
It's 45 feet.
45. Okay, so we're fine there. Okay.
And then the side is
Yeah, we have plenty of room.
263.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Bob, you had some comments?
Yes. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Basically, and I understand why, the reasoning behind the logic here, that the applicant didn't prepare. All of the stormwater comments are very substantial. Obviously, it takes a lot of time and effort to do that. So to Sabrina's point, obviously, they're waiting from guidance from the planning board to come up with the final layout and then submit all the stormwater comments I had in my previous memo of November 12, 2021. Which predominantly ST1 up to ST11. Obviously, none of those have been addressed to date until such time they have the finalized layout. General comments GC1 leading up to GC15. 2 or 3 have been satisfactorily addressed, but I just want to mention a few things that I noticed Mr. Rao had mentioned on this layout here, in light of the facts the planning board makes the determination. On the cut in the back, is that a retaining wall you're showing if you cannot achieve the slope in the rock based on the geotech report?
Correct. We show a rock cut for now. And I made note that 801 rock cut geology report to be supplied by others once we retain structural. and a geologist. Same thing with the front as well.
Okay, because it looks like a retaining wall in the back. You show a bottom and top, 453, 479.
I was trying to, in a way, mimic the lean of the rock. I tried to use a rock hatch. I'm sorry if it's confusing.
Okay, but my point is, if that geotech determines that is friable rock, there's too much overburden, there's a chance of possibly too much erosion in the future, a retaining wall will have to be designed then, and you're not going to do one now?
That's what the way we were progressing with it.
Would it make some sense to design some sort of conceptual retaining wall now? You see, that means you'll have to stop right in the middle of the construction and wait for the geotech to design a wall.
Well, we can, because we do have to retain somebody to design the wall in the front anyway. So we might just start the ball rolling on that.
I would recommend that. It might save some time because, you know, again, the geotech will determine that, but it might not be the case. I've seen it happen in maybe one site that I've worked with over the past 30 years in town where the rock face was good. All the others seemed friable, but we'll find out. Secondly, I noticed in discussion with the Commissioner of Public Works, he's very concerned with the location of the head wall and the excavation, because keep in mind, there's two water mains in that roadway, one a 15 inch, one a 16 inch, and one a 20 inch. And that has to be very, very carefully located prior to any work being there. Those are two main transmission lines. So I would highly recommend that you contact Chris Lupo of the water department and make certain, for darn certain, where the heck these water mains are before you start putting all these details in there, because you might have to move the pipe back, you might have to move the head wall back. So I would highly recommend you do that, Anthony.
Okay.
But that's all I have for now, and thank you, Chairman.
Bob, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
In one of the earlier minutes that we are looking at tonight, you had suggested that there were some stone monuments on the property that didn't look like they were part of the rock pile. Was that ever reconciled as to what they were?
I think that was noted on the environmental coordinator.
Yeah, I think that was Dennis. I do not recall that.
And
Okay.
I didn't think it was an issue originally, but it was on the memo again, because that was something else we wanted to ask about.
Right, Anthony's right. I believe Dennis brought up that comment.
All right, my mistake. But
That's
still,
okay.
if they're rock monuments, what are they? Just random rocks? Or
Boulders, I don't know. You'd have to check with Dennis on that. I'm not quite sure.
Dennis is on the line too.
Okay.
All right, well, that's still, I don't think it was answered. I didn't find anything in the notes.
Yep.
So I guess.
Anthony, do you have any answer on that or no?
No, I from recollection at a previous meeting, I thought it wasn't concerning Dennis. So I might have misunderstood from the original meeting. I didn't think it was of concern.
Well, it might not be, depending upon where they are and what they are, but I think Dennis had asked for some sort of clarification, some information on it. So it might very well.
Yeah,
not.
I mean, if it assists, so from my prior memo, I'll start from the bottom up if that's okay. If you're done, Bob, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just.
No, I'm done.
So
Thank you, Dennis.
segue
Thank you,
to-
Chairman.
Okay. So, I mean, the last time I, kind of stressed maybe a little bit more from a cultural resources perspective, but, I mean, I'm sure that you'll be able to document at the state level if there's anything of concern, probably at that acronym Chris website.
Yeah,
But
Chris.
I just felt that, yep, exactly. So I said, in consideration of our local code, and I know that there was the change of when I guess there was an amendment which was a little more recent. I just suggested that or reach out just to sort of our landmarks commission just to determine if there's anything of concern, because I don't know. I'm not going to lie. I don't know specifically where those old property walls, stone walls, boulder walls, if they themselves have any significance. Do they need to be in a certain setting in order to have significance? Do they not have any significance? So I am not really qualified to say one way or the other, but since, you know, we do have the code and we do have the Landmarks Advisory Committee of 2 members, I would say just, you know, a consult with them and, you know, what their comments are or not, you know, could potentially resolve this. I just didn't want it to hang because I can't personally resolve it. That's all.
Okay. Yeah, I could check the CRIS system. They have a map for historical areas, and I can also call the maybe put a call into the advisory board.
Yeah, and that, you know, again, I'm not saying there is something or isn't something, but, you know, if you've, you know, your due diligence will be completed, you know, if you, you know, obviously look at those two sources and come up with whatever the results are and just report on them. The remainder of my memo, again, I guess I indicated similar to Bob, where comments sort of just carried over, and understandably, I know that, you know, the phase that you're in terms of this development, so some of those, it was reasonable to have some of those comments carry over, you know, especially when you're talking about, you know, items like landscaping and whatnot. And I just sort of just wanted to verify what you said earlier about, yeah, the number of trees were reduced, and that I was in agreement with the replacement calculations, both in terms of number of trees and contribution to the tree bank fund that was provided. But then, as I said, the remaining comments would still apply in terms of carryover as far as the proper distributions of species and canopy and understory, et cetera, you know, consistent with 121-6. But again, I'm confident, you know, if you guys get something that's more solidified in terms of your design, you know, you could take another look at that and sure revise it.
Yeah.
And that pretty much summarizes my comments.
Yeah, Dennis, I actually have Dave Sessions now looking at the project. We're looking at possibly switching around some of the species to take account for everything instead of the 33% of one species. And he's going to look at the site again and come up with a better plan as well.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Okay, anything else, Dennis?
All good, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, very good, thanks. Comments, questions from board members?
Yeah, looks like an improvement.
Yep. There is an issue here, and I guess it goes somewhat to configuration. Well, 2 questions. First of all, the building has grown 629 feet, so it's fairly substantial. I think it's 5,200 square feet now, or 5,300 square feet proposed. And you know, when we have this kind of impact on steep slopes, one wonders whether or not we're moving in the right direction. The second item is, I guess, really a question for Sabrina and Jennifer. You know, we have zoning here, which is, as I observed before, is constraining some of the location of this house because of this distance. Is it something that, you know, can we make a recommendation, which would, you know, unfortunately for the applicant, require the applicant to get a variance from the zoning board? You know, we're dealing with a distance here that is environmentally causing problems. For example, I would think that it would be more advantageous if the house in this configuration slid further to the north. We would shorten the driveway. It looks to be a little bit more level there anyway, but obviously the applicant's not doing that because they're right up against that 75-foot setback line on the property line. So I don't know if that is something that is we can do. Is it something that's appropriate? Something that's inappropriate? Maybe even prohibited? So that's a question, because it seems to me that they're on the right track here. But I think that the driveway could be shortened, perhaps, and we could move that building further to the north, off some of that steep slope, the real extreme steep slope. To the south, perhaps mitigate the wall that they're building, and perhaps even have the wall stepped. That's the wall to the southeast. And so that was one issue. And then the other is, from my standpoint, I know this road, and I know the posted speed limit is 25, but it's almost a joke. So I want to be very, very sure that we have sight lines that are appropriate for the actual speeds that are witnessed out there. And I think Bob has spoken to that issue far better than I can. So that's something we really have to look at.
Can I say something, Chairman, on that point?
Sure. Yep.
And I know what Anthony said before, he just increased the speed, but I've seen instances sometimes when you do the 85th percentile, which is the correct way to do it from an engineering standpoint, because that's a steep slope coming down there very steep on the driveway itself on the roadway. I would still recommend they do an 85th percentile, because I was speaking to Ann Dorelius of the state, and I know Jennifer's going to touch on this later on with who owns that darn road. It's always better to base it on the 85th percentile, and I understand you bumped up the speed, but the 85th percentile might be more than 35, Anthony, so I'm still going to require that.
So you want a traffic study on that?
Yes. One idea I had, guys, Chairman, if you don't mind, I'm going to pose this towards Jennifer and really Sabrina. This right-of-way line, for some reason, don't ask me why it's off the roadway 40, 50, 60, 70 feet. Would it make any sense to get a re-subdivision and bring the property line back down to where it should be normally 15, 20 feet off the road? And that would do away with all of the significant infrastructure that's located in the right-of-way. And it might be a little bit less of a effort for the applicant to get all those permits and license agreements and from either the state or the town. Just food for thought, guys, because that's 50 feet off the road.
Right, but I would question why. I'd have to spend some more time looking at the history of establishing this right away in relation.
Oh, I can tell you right now how it was established. These were properties owned by, I did an enormous amount of research with the developer applicant. These all came with property lines, and when they took this property over, the East of Hudson Thruway Authority, they never went back and gave it back out either to the town or did it properly. So these were actually property lines of several property owners many, many years ago, it was in the 60s. So, that's the brief, quick down and dirty history of this property line.
So a re-subdivision process would require the owner of that right-of-way, whether it's the town or the state, to be a party to the application, because it's land owned by an entity, right? So whoever that owner is would have to be a joint applicant. So I think I appreciate your creative thinking, Bob. I think the re-subdivision process might actually be more complicated than working through the highway work permit or street opening permit process. Since we're on the topic of the ownership of the right of way, I know that there is that question out there as to whether it's the state right of way or a town right of way. The state is looking into that. What I would suggest is what the applicant may want to do is get a title opinion, contact an abstract company, a title company, and get an opinion as to the ownership. That may
we
be
started that process.
You did. Good.
Yeah,
good.
we started. Yeah, we spoke to Jerry about this. She might help us out with this as well. But I just wanted to know one other thing about shortening the driveway. We're dealing with the maximum grade to get up to the house right now because of the grade change. So that wouldn't even help us.
Yeah, I was going to bring up that point too. So on the question that the chairman asked about, the potential for a variance here, if we're going to be shortening the driveway and moving the house around, I think it's a good discussion to have if that's something that's physically feasible for the applicant to do. It sounds like it might be difficult with the grades, but I would recommend that the planning board sort of stop short of requiring the variance to be applied for, unless it's something that would, it's such a non-starter for the planning board as far as the granting of your steep slopes permit. If it was something that, but for the movement of that house closer to the property line in a way that would require a variance, is something that would, preclude you from issuing your steep slopes permit. If that's not done, then we'll have to, talk a little bit more seriously about that. But from what I'm hearing from Anthony, it sounds like that may not even be physically feasible.
Yeah, we're at maximum grade coming up the hill, and I actually moved the house as close as I could to actually give a flat platform at the top.
You're at 14% right now, Anthony?
I think I'm at 13. I like to leave buffers because when it's constructed, I always like to leave a 1% buffer. So if it is 14, I have 13. I could bring it up.
Yeah, we can approve up to 16. But you're right, though. I would never recommend designing it at 16 because you know what happens when they build it.
Yeah,
And
that's
you'd be 17.
exactly.
No.
We always leave a little bit of a threshold. Yeah, I'm at 13.9 right now.
That's fairly steep.
Yeah.
Well, can you, I'd like to explore that a little bit if we can. Could you go back to your site plan again, please? Thank you, Anthony. So I understand what you're saying, but it looks to me that there's 464, which is coming essentially across the pad, right in front of the garage. And then the next contour line is 462, which is quite a distance from there. I wonder down to the right, 462 crossing,
over here.
crossing the driveway. Right there. That's
Yep.
462. Am I right?
That's correct. Yes.
So if you would, I understand you want a flat area for the pad in front of the garage. But if you drop the house by 2 feet, doesn't that make it possible to move the house, the whole house location farther to the north, as Bob is suggesting?
It's slightly, yeah.
You don't have to get to 464 anymore.
That'll
perhaps-
create more of a cut into this hillside, and that was the other issue that came up.
Well, it might, or it might, or it might not. I mean, it depends on. I mean, that's because of the way you've designed it. I mean, you don't have to take more cut in the hillside. It just means that actually you have less cut in the hillside. I mean, you might have more cut, vertical cut, but you might have less of it because you are reducing the distance between your rock face wall and the corner of the house. That whole area gets a little bit smaller. So I agree with Bob that it's a very difficult site. And if we were, if this were today and this, the whole subdivision plan for this whole neighborhood was before us, I think we'd have a hard time approving this as a lot, but it's a lot now. So we have to deal with it and do our best with it. And I just don't see the necessity of putting this house essentially, over the steep slope to the south and regrading and putting retaining walls in order to do that. One of the things that is driving some of this is also the desire to have this 40-foot lawn area, flat area on the west side of the house, up against the what you hope to be a rock cut into the slope. So I'm just wondering if you solve the problem for getting off of the steep slope to the south by moving the house to the north and dropping it by a couple of feet, and then work your way around the consequences of that. You may end up with a plan that works pretty much as well as this one does.
And building on that, perhaps the issue is not dropping the entire house, but just dropping the garage itself by the 2 feet, and then have a walk up into the balance of the house.
That's a good idea also.
Oh, but if you do some of that, you need 75-foot frontage, right?
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, that's the other issue. Exactly.
Well, but is it? But so you move the house to the west. If you
Yep.
draw, you see that you just move it
It's
along that dash setback line, right? On the corner right there. You move it. Sorry, I wish I had the cursor. Go to the corner where the 75-foot setback line
Oh,
is
right here.
right there, right. And if you move the house, that corner along that line, I mean, is there a way to get what we're talking about done? Everything on this drawing is fungible and is possible to be redone. So there's nothing really that's given here. There are certain things that are more logical than others, but it sort of depends on what you're trying to solve for. And I'm just wondering if there isn't a solution that, that essentially gets you the house you want on the property you want, if you just start by solving for, trying to minimize the steep slopes. By the way, I appreciate what you've done so far. I mean, I think this is really a huge improvement. So I don't mean to denigrate that one bit, Anthony. I think it's a big move forward. And I appreciate the desire to get these things resolved sooner rather than later, so you don't make more investments in your engineering and your design work. But so I'm asking, that's why I'm asking the question now, is there a way to do some of that?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to work with the architect and see if this is, if he wants to make any changes with the house, with the floor heights. I'd have to work with him, because when we look at it, we looked at different options and how to position this house. And yeah, there's probably many different ways.
Yeah, so if you'd explore that, that'd be great. I have another question, if I could ask you about the rock cut that you want to make on the west side. And you're hoping that you'll have rock that will be stable enough so that you can get this, I guess it ends up being something like 8 feet, varying from whatever to 8 feet. Tell me about why that strategy isn't being used on the driveway, because the driveway, you're actually cutting back. You're doing a very steep slope cut there.
Yeah.
Is it your proposal to just go ahead and cut that, or are you going to be, as you begin to excavate the roadway, the driveway, are you looking to identify if it's possible to actually do what you hope to do on that rock wall on the west side of the house, which is just have a cut and be able to maintain it because the rock is stable?
Yeah, we were hoping. Well, right now, a lot of this is visible rock. For instance, the entrance is all visibly rock. But like Bob was saying, do we have both options? So if it's not rock, we can then implement the wall.
You also the reason I have them show the cutback, because if they show a clearing and grading limit line based on just the 8-on-1 rock slope, and they have to cut it back after the fact, guess what? They'll have to come back to the planning board for the clearing and gradient. So I always rather have them show the most conservative route when they cut it back with a natural grade of 2-on-1. And if they hit rock in the field, then it clearing and gradient comes in. It's a win-win. That's the reason I have them show the most conservative, because that happened in several instances, previous situations. And, it's going to delay the whole project if they have to come back to the planning board, if it's not good rock.
Thank you, Bob. That makes really good sense to me. So thanks for that. So this is like to be discovered in the process of excavation to see what actually would be the most sensible and practical thing to do there. Yeah. Okay. So I'm a little bit concerned about the unknown on the where the Coltex system number 1 is, over on the south side, right in there. No, over here on the south. Sorry, on the south.
Oh yeah, south. Yeah, south.
Yeah, right in there. So you're proposing to hopefully create this flat lawn at about 452, it looks like, behind the house by cutting into the rock slope. But there is, it doesn't seem to be any resolution of grade at the end of that wall where it comes close to the Coltex system. I mean, there's no, on one side of the wall, it's 453 where it ends. On the other side, it's 465. Is there, how do you discover, how do you, getting back to Bob's comment about wanting to be sure we have the most conservative design in place, Shouldn't we be looking at what happens there a little bit more closely?
Yeah, I think this might be an error. This rock cut was supposed to come down a bit. Because yeah, the 52, 53. So that might be the problem. That probably has to come down a little bit more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. I
No
just
worries.
noticed that myself.
No worries. So I'd like to ask about your planting plan, if we could.
Sure. Go to it.
There you go. Oh,
Nope, sorry.
no worries. So
My work computer, it's control to zoom in here. You got the buttons.
yeah, we want to zoom in to, I'd like to zoom into the driveway, the planting at the driveway where it meets the road. We're on that cut. Yeah, that's great, right there. That's
Right there.
perfect. According to the schedule, I think that the 1AR is a red maple. And PG and the KL are pines, unless I'm mistaken. No, PG and
Yeah, I'll just zoom down again. The AR is the October Glory, Ace
PG
Rubrum,
is spruce, right?
and the PG is a white spruce.
A spruce, and there's another. Okay, so those are the two. Those are the two trees. Am I right?
Correct. Yep. The three trees, the three ARs.
3 ARs and the PG, but those are the two species. So could you go back to the plan then? So I'm looking at 1 AR on the south side and 2 ARs on the north side. I'm sorry, 1 AR on the east side and 2 ARs on the west side, and 2 PGs on the west side and 1 PG on the east side. And I'm looking at the rest of them are shrubs and ground cover, I think. Mostly shrubs, I guess, mountain laurel.
Mhm.
So this is, if you end up actually having to cut this back to a 1-to-2 slope for that distance and that depth, that is going to be a really, really big scar. And I'm wondering if you can get a maple tree to grow there. I think we need more trees. I think we really need to plant this out in order to repair the scar that you're going to have to make there. So I would suggest working with Dennis if we can find a way to get a lot more trees in there, to see if we can solve that problem and get it back to, as much as we can, get it back to the forest, which is there now, up in there. I happen to live on this road, so and I've been living here for 30 years. And every once in a while, things happen on this side of town, and people will ask me, why did that happen? Why? How did that happen? Was there another way to do that? And I could just hear what's going to happen when this project gets going. People are going to be asking, is there really, did this have to happen? Did you guys approve this? And I'm not saying we're not going to approve it, but I'm saying that there will be a legitimate concern about the way it will transform the character of that roadway. Everybody who lives in this neighborhood comes up that hill. It's really pretty much the way to get into our neighborhood. So I think it would be good if we paid a little bit more attention to the landscaping there.
Yeah, as mentioned, I have Dave Sessions now looking at this plan again. He's our LA in our office.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then one more thing, getting to the sight line. I think that Bob Cioli is spot on with his concern about the actual speed here. People go down this road. If you're going down towards Route 100 from the neighborhood, you come to the intersection of Inningwood. Was it Inningwood Court? It's the dead end, which as you're coming down is on the left. And then from there, it's just like a free sled ride down to the bottom because there are no driveways. There are no impediments, and people just have the habit of, once they get to that intersection, just sort of letting it rip to get down to the bottom. And I think that that's going to be a bit of a problem if we don't make sure that somebody coming out of that driveway has an opportunity to see what's happening. I think my concern would be mostly to the left, people coming down the hill more so than people going up the hill. But I do think that we really ought to be paying attention to this. And I think Bob is right. Even 35 miles an hour I don't think it's going to cut it. I just think that not everybody drives faster than that, but a lot of people do. There are commuters that come through the neighborhood to get down to the bottom of the hill to get to the Taconic, and they do it every morning. And, it's something you do every day. You sort of tend to do things, you get into habits, which are maybe not, the best habits in the world, and you end up driving faster than you should in a stretch of road like this. So I think it'd be good if we took a look at that. I support Bob's concern.
So in the past, I know the board has had this issue on other roadways in regards to reviewing applications. In the past, we've asked the police department to go out and do a speed study out there to determine whether or not they need to change the speed of the road, but that the applicant shouldn't have to do a traffic study, but designing to the 85th percentile is something that we can ask them to do.
Yeah, but Sabrina, we only use the chief to confirm what the applicant gets. We don't do the studies for the applicant.
I know, but in the past, if you recall, Bob, we've had these conversations regarding other projects, and if the speeding is an issue that the planning board wants the applicant to design to, that we needed to establish the baseline of that, and that's usually done by the police department. The chief has asked me to make sure that we notify them if we need them to do that. But if you're requiring a design standpoint to an 85th percentile because of that, that's one thing, if the applicant is willing to do that. And then the police can, examine it in that context. But I just wanted to kind of set the stage and the process accordingly to what the chief has recommended.
WC has told me that he will only do it, just to confirm what the applicant's engineer comes up with. That's what we did on Whipple Road with Tavalacci.
Yeah, I think there was another application where we did this, and he directed otherwise. So
I don't recall that, but
correct me if I'm wrong, Bob. But you need to basically count the speeds and take readings of cars to get to the 85th percentile, correct?
yeah, they put the ATRs
Yeah.
out, and they do it over several times, several hours for so many days. And they come up with the 85th percentile, yes.
Well,
Usually
however,
done by PTOE.
Yep. However it's done, I think we all recognize that's a very, very important element to this application. And I guess at this point, I think what you're hearing from the board is that this orientation is a significant improvement from what we saw last time. But this is a steep slopes application. And one of the things that we look to do is to try to avoid as much as possible before we start thinking about mitigating. And I think you've heard that if it's possible, whether it's through shrinking the house back down to the size that we looked at last fall, and or however, moving, perhaps pivoting slightly the building so that it moves to the north and we shorten the driveway, and not because we're just to shorten the driveway, but because we can get it off those extremely steep slopes to the south, and avoid those to a greater extent than we're seeing here. If it turns out that it really becomes a real problem for you, then we'll hear about that. But in terms of takeaways, I think that's one of the takeaways from us. I think you've made great progress. But we're on the right route, but we're looking to see whether or not it is possible through some design changes, perhaps with the architecture as well, to move the house further away from those steep slopes on the southeast corner. And any kind of walls, especially that wall in the front, if we do that, if it's possible, obviously to lessen the size of the wall, but will it also give us a little bit more room so that we can see a wall that's stepped, and then we might have some vegetation in between the steps to cover some of the wall. And then obviously you've heard, I mean, the entrance is going to be a very, very important issue in terms of the pipes and DPW's concerns, and of course the view sheds. And I think we've given you a little bit of concern about the necessity of cutting that rock in the back to flatten that area for the basement, and flattening an area, I guess that would be a grassed area. Again, we're dealing with so many slopes. If you can move the house further and avoid some of those steep slopes, extremely steep slopes on the southwest corner, I think we would probably be, you know, less concerned with some of the other slopes that you have in some of the other areas, and we can work with you. So I think those are the takeaways. I hope that gives you some guidance, so that you know, we know that we're on the right path. And I think one of the issues that we talked about earlier at the staff level was that stormwater is going to be a very, very important issue. We have confidence that designs can be engineered to make certain that water does not go onto Inningwood Road, but it's going to be really important that we don't have water spilling onto Inningwood Road, especially in the winters where it freezes. That would be just an untenable hazard. So you know, obviously you haven't looked at it in that kind of detail yet, but it's something that is, we've really got to see that when you are getting set. And I think we would really have to look at that and go through it with Bob and the engineers, and before we schedule a public hearing. So that's something that would have to be done sooner than later before we go to public. In this particular case, I think it's that critically important.
I have a question. Is there anything that can be done relative to leaving the driveway, that we could warn people that are speeding down the hill that slow down? You know, like a flashing yellow light goes on when there's a vehicle that is, you know, at the end of the driveway getting ready to go to the road, so that more people would slow down when the vehicle is going out. And that might be something that would be helpful, even if it's temporary, for moving the excess rock out of the, you know, the lower entrance, and then hitting the road there too, because those are slower trucks. And warning signs, and I think I mentioned once before that, you know, for that work, you can have flag people that might help to slow it down. But a flashing sign, and not red, but yellow, I don't know if that works, but that might help save lives or accidents.
Are you talking, Dick, about just during construction, or is it a permanent thing?
I'm talking about for the lower one, that it's temporary, and for the upper one, permanent.
Well, I know what I would really have people knocking on my door saying, you know, why is there a flashing yellow light in my neighborhood? And the answer that I would have to give them, well, we did that for the benefit of somebody who wanted to develop this property, because that's that would be essentially
but you could also set it up so that it works like, you know, one of those signs that says 35, you're going too fast. That would be something that would be normal, and it wouldn't flash unless the people were speeding, doing it the other way. Some people actually slow down when they see those signs.
That would be an imposition. I'm telling you, that would be an imposition on what people consider to be the
those.
But Dick, I really would like to speak, if I may. So just give me a second to get my thought out. I really think that would be an imposition on what people see as being, you know, their quality of life in the neighborhood. And the answer to the question would be, well, we did it so this person could develop the property. And I think that the answer is to solve it in the engineering of that driveway, so you don't have to take that step. The burden should be on the developer of the property to solve the problem, not impacting the neighborhood. That's my thought.
Well, I see a flashing speed sign. I see them all over the place now. And, I don't think that, that we shouldn't, I think we should have one here if people are speeding down the road just for general purposes. Even before it should be there, period. It's just too steep a hill and people just love to coast down it. So I think it's a improvement to traffic safety on the whole road.
Well, it's not the obligation of the planning department to the planning board to be responsible for general traffic safety. It's just not. And so I hesitate for us to go around in all of our projects to set the principle that we are now going to begin to tell, the police department and the roads people, public works, how to manage the roads. It's just not our job. And so if my message to the applicant would be, don't rely on a speed sign, any kind of a speed sign on this road to solve your problem. Because if you're going to rely on that, you will not get my vote.
Yeah, I disagree.
Okay, yep. Are there any other things that we've missed here? Anthony, is there anything else you want to hear from us? Have we given you enough information or direction that you can take back and work with? Are there any open, we wanted to get you to a certain point where you felt confident that you could move forward and start to dig into the stormwater and the other issues that you have to dig into. But are we there yet? Are there any questions, any more direction you need from us in terms of, what we're talking about, what's important to us?
No, I think covered it all.
Okay. Well, I know we covered it all, but I hope we gave you some direction. We usually cover it very thoroughly, but we're really trying to help applicants when they leave to sit there and not just shake their head. Yeah, they covered it all right, but we gave you some direction.
Yeah. Yes, you gave me direction. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. That was the point of the meeting, I think, tonight.
Yeah.
So if we did that, we've actually made headway. That's good. Good.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we appreciate it, and again, thank you for working on this and putting this together. And we'll see you then with the next rendition.
Okay.
Next meeting should be shorter.
Yeah. I don't know about that.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
Very good. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Our next item is a referral from the town board. This is on a local law referral. This is to enact. I guess the old moratorium actually expired. So this is actually, is it expanding?
It's a brand new moratorium.
Brand new. Okay. I thought it was brand new. I thought
It's brand new. The town board wishes to reinstitute a moratorium on the area of the North Greeley Corridor. Under the same vein that it did last time, allowing anything less than 3,000 square feet to proceed, as well as improvements needed for health and safety reasons. So you have the local law before you. The town board is holding a public hearing this evening, and that's the current status.
Okay. Anyone have concerns with it, problems with it? It seems to me that, we had our joint meeting, and I think we've got our charge, and I think we're trying to help the town board move forward. So it seems to be a reasonable step at this point. But any cause for concern? If not, we could just send a very brief memo to the town board and indicate that we support the new moratorium. Is it a 6-month one, Sabrina?
Yes, it is 6 months.
Okay. So it's a new one and it's for 6 months. Any thoughts, questions?
No, it's written in English, sounds logical. So.
Well, I'll have to blame lawyers for that somehow. All right, so is there a motion then to issue a memo to the town board supporting the moratorium in the local law?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, 4 carried, no opposed. All right, so that's that. The next item is the North Greeley corridor issue that we've been talking about. What I was hoping to do this evening was to finish up on retail to the point where I hope we can have a consensus so that we can, even at this point, send some information to the town board. I understand that all these things are interconnected, but at some point, you know, we've got to make, I think, some recommendations or give some thoughts to the town board and say, here's what we're thinking. A, just to make sure that we're not completely off the tracks where they want to go. But I think more importantly, to supply this information as they have their discussions and their conversations, to let them know what we're thinking in terms of aspects. And the first aspect that we decided to talk about, of course, was the retail. And, you know, I think our discussion on retail has got implications. You know, one of the issues that jumps out, just for example, I'm not saying that we support it at this point or not, but obviously the implication of shortening the ground floor ceiling height from 16 feet to 11.5, 12, 10, whatever it might be, has all kinds of potential implications on this whole concern about number of stories and building height. So it might give us more flexibility. So that was, I was hoping the goal. I know last time there was some thought, well, we finished up retail, you know, let's bang off onto the next one. I don't think we are, because I'd really like to have a product that we could give to the town board, a memo.
Well, if we're talking about, you know, commercial shops and things like that, I think we have a lot of empty places right now. We got 4 up or 5, I'm not sure which. I think it's 4 for sure. No, it's 5, you know, up on the top of the hill in uptown Chappaqua. And then I believe there's still 2 or 3 in downtown. So at the moment, it doesn't seem that there's a commercial need. Now, maybe service, you know, that could possibly be true, but service is going digital faster than shopping, I think. You know, so, you know, the only thing I can see out of the list that's interesting is the restaurant, hospitality, entertainment. And if I melded those together, I remember in the past, you know, restaurants that had a piano player, or way in the past had comedians come in after the meal or something like that. You know, have a meal and listen to a comedian. So my 2 cents for the moment.
Okay. Well, I tried to break down some things, and I think Tom amplified them really well in terms of, I think we should talk to this issue of perception. And I think there's a difference between the so-called desirability and market need. And I think that that's worthy of an observation from us. I think my opinion was the form-based code proposal, and not because it was a form-based code, it's just whatever the last zoning proposal I don't want to use terms that get people all worked up one way or the other, but it called for a lot of retail in the ground floor in a lot of areas, and even on North Greeley. And it seems to me that we are moving toward some sort of recognition that retail in that area, it may be desirable to limit it. Tom raised the point that it should be down close to the southern part of North Greeley, which I think we spoke about last time. I think Eldad made that observation as well during our conversation. And that going up further north in the transition zone, there's probably less need for commercial and retail. And not only that, it might not work as well. So, and then this whole issue, which I think Tom really raised very nicely in his memo, you know, the opportunity cost of retail, making the observation that, you know, when you have retail, you're just going to generate a higher demand for parking space. It's just the nature of it. Now, whether our current ratios are right, wrong, or in between, and maybe I know in the last zoning attempt, I think there were some changes made with some of the assumptions on parking, and some of those numbers were different. And Sabrina provided us with that table last time, which was very helpful. But no matter what, retail, the observation I think is fair that retail will demand more parking. And that means, you know, less usable space for something else, whether it's, you know, residential. So, you know, where do we want to go with this, and what kinds of recommendations do we want to make? I think some of those make a great deal of sense. And of course, Eldad last time, unfortunately, he's not here tonight, emphasized the F word, flexibility, giving flexibility to developers, giving flexibility to the market for market conditions. And I think in response to that, when Tom made the observation, well, we don't need 16-foot ceilings for this kind of retail that we're looking at, and that all of a sudden starts to give us some different solutions, maybe some different problems. But all this, I think, is part of the pot. And I think we really need to come up with some sort of, again, solution and recommendations to the town board. I personally think that some of these observations are going to be a little bit stunning to the town board, even the current town board, because I think so many people are just making the supposition that we need to have more retail, and that's the solution. So anyway, I've talked too much. Thoughts, anyone? Kanan, Tom, Richard?
Yeah, so the one thing I can say, I agree with the idea that in this North Greeley corridor, retail definitely wants to be flexible, partly because you don't know what the needs are going to be based on how much, like you're just going to need a certain amount of footfall to really make retail work. And without knowing what that footfall is going to be, it's hard to predict what that will be. That said, I mean, there are ways to work around the 16-foot or whatever for retail, where giving that height would mean you just have different kinds of units, right? So you could have live work units, you could have, you know, multiple like, sort of duplex, sort of within that, stoops. I mean, there are possibilities that we can look at to accommodate different kinds of housing if need be, instead of the retail, and still leave that height for the ability to sort of, let's say we build enough density that we need that retail to go in there, or it's like, I don't know, some sort of workshop, or, you know, a couple of workshops or whatever it is that to accommodate for different uses. So that's my 2 cents. But otherwise, I do agree with everything you said about increase in parking and not knowing exactly what that retail would look like. And I'm just assuming it's for the North Greeley corridor that we are talking about right now.
Yes, yes, that's it right now, yes.
Yeah.
So
the other issues, one quick thing, Tom, because I think this will help you. I'm sure it will, actually. One of the other issues is, again, from my perspective, is being looking at this in terms of, you know, what we want. That's I put in that first line in there. What you know, creating the hamlet in the image that we want to see. So it's not just I don't think trying to anticipate market needs, etc. But after all, this is our town, and what do we want it to look like? What do we want to have in that region of our hamlet? Do we, you know, it seems to me that we want a blend of residential and housing and some commercial. So, you know, again, what do we want to do? And I think no matter what we do, we want to really try to emphasize walkability, livability, the scale that makes sense for what we've heard from our residents, that our character, our bucolic nature, et cetera. So it blends in with all of those important elements. So anyway, Tom, I cut you off.
no, what you said, I think actually is very, very good. Because we can look at vacancies today, and we can look at demand that used to be, you know, 10 years ago or 5 years ago, and we can project demand 5 years from now. I mean, that's all fine, but those numbers go up and down all the time. I mean, that's the history of the life of towns. It's just the way it is. And I mean, this town's been around since, you know, what, 1790 or whatever. So we ought to be thinking, I think, the long game, which to me is essentially what you just said, Bob. What kind of town do we want to have here, right? What's the structure of the town that we can grow into, and the structure of town that is characteristic of a hamlet, which has some history to it and has some logic to it. And so I wouldn't worry if, gee whiz, 5 years from now, there was a demand for 10,000 more square feet of retail, and we didn't have any place to put it. That's not a problem. I mean, that's really not a problem.
It's not.
And so as a consequence, or we have 10,000 square feet more than we need. Well, that's a little bit of a concern, but a few years later it gets filled, or there's something else that happens in that space in the interim. So I think that we ought to have in our minds a recommendation about what we think that street ought to be, could be, from the intersection all the way up to, let's just say, the post office right now, because that seems to be a convenient transition point. And I think that retail concentrated towards the intersection, which I think most people think is the heart of town, makes a lot of sense. And because there really is little footfall, and won't be a lot of footfall unless you drag it up there somehow with an anchor, there's really not going to be any footfall up to the northern part of North Greeley. I just don't think it's going to happen. So maybe that ought to be a residential portion of it, and you have a combination of residential and retail on that corridor. The subject of flexibility, I understand the terms. We want to make it flexible for so you can transition from retail to residential, to retail. I'm not sure exactly which way that would go at any particular point in time. As a planning term, gee, it sounds great. But practically speaking, I'm not sure it is as a planning term, because if you say, well, okay, for now, we are going to let you're going to have to build a retail space, but we're going to let you put residences in there. That person who builds that retail space will have to reserve somewhere parking for that retail space. Right. And so there's land there that is going to sit vacant or dormant, right? Which is going to frustrate his development capability potentially, with the hope that one day he gets retail. But if he doesn't, there's a problem. So that I think it's a planning. If I was a developer, this kind of thing would just drive me nuts, quite frankly. The other part of it is the architectural side of retail versus residential. These are two completely fundamental buildings. They just are. If you go to Tom DePaul, pick up the building code. I mean, you have to have, for a residential, for a living unit, you have to have so much natural air and natural light, ventilation and natural light to your rooms, the bedrooms and living rooms and so on. A retail store has only one, right, window, and it's the shop front. They don't want any other windows. They want essentially blank walls all the way around. Residential has the requirement for typically a residence is, if it's a row house, it might be 40 feet deep, 45 feet deep, somewhere in there, right? Because after a while it gets to be too deep and it doesn't work anymore. Because if it's a row house, you've got only light in the front and in the back, so you can't have all these dark rooms to get to the back. So you then have a sort of a limitation on the logical building size. A retail store is typically 60, 80 feet deep, and it has no windows. And so it's just architecturally incompatible, as far as I can tell. It's incompatible to tell a developer, well, here is what we want you to do. And if I was a developer, I would say, just make up your mind. I mean, please just make up your mind, and don't complicate my life. If we're coming up with these building codes and in order to new building codes, form-based code, whatever we want to call it, in order to make it more attractive for developers to come in, this is just the kind of thing that's going to say, I just don't want to deal with this. this is nuts. So I think that we need to, building on your observation, Bob, we need to figure out what we think makes a really great street, make a great street today, make a great street 20 years from now. Figure out what that is. And this isn't rocket science. You just have to decide. Figure out what that street is, how much of it's retail, how much of it's residential, and then let the market decide when they are going to come in and develop that, right? And the whole notion of flexibility sort of, it flies in the face of zoning. I mean, we have zoning purposefully to solve problems like this for us. So we ought to use zoning in order to do what it's supposed to do and say, okay, this is where we have residential, this is where we have retail. I just think it's going to make things much clearer, and it's much more practical. And so that's my recommendation.
Okay, good.
I mean, I'm an architect. I've designed, done neighborhood design, community design. I've laid out apartment buildings. I've laid out row houses in the service of planning. These are just numbers that are just pretty much universal everywhere. I mean, it's the real world, the way things go. And I really think that the town board, and I think we made this observation to them in our joint meeting with them, they ought to sit down and talk to some developers. They ought to sit down and talk to the guys who build this stuff and get their input on, well, how, if we told you that we want to have retail, but we're going to let you put residential in there in the meantime, what would their answer be? Would they have a way to do that? Would they think that's rational? If it is rational, that's great. I just suspect that it's not.
Well, I agree that it's complicated, particularly since you have, what is it, AT&T still has a building there. And, and we have a parking lot that works for, the road coming down the hill and the crossroad. So yeah, I think it's to me, when I look at it and try to figure it out from an engineering point of view, there's a lot of things that have to change to, get the space that really makes sense. So it is difficult. I agree.
And on the building height, the floor to floor height, I was over in Katona looking around because I was just interested to see, again, to revisit that streetscape in that town, and it's just so successful. And you guys, I'm sure you all know the history of the place, and there's an old general store that was one of the original buildings that was moved, right?
Yep.
To this location, and it's a great business. It's a great building, and I was in there, and I asked the guy if he knew what his ceiling height was. You walk into that store and the ceiling is like up there. And I asked him, do you know what your ceiling height is? He says, no, I don't, but let's measure it. So we got out a tape measure and we measured the ceiling height, and it's like 11 feet, and it's like cavernous, right? Even for a big floor plate like that. It's crazy that we would be saying that may be appropriate for a big floor plate building, like a TJ Maxx or I don't know, a home Office Depot for something like that. That ceiling height makes perfect sense, but that's not what we're talking about here. We are not talking about large floor plate retail buildings. We're just not doing that. And the consequence of having these large floor plate buildings, these high floor to floor buildings, floor to ceiling spaces, are that it's more expensive to build. It costs more money to heat and cool. And it is impactful to the overall scale of the streetscape in the hamlet, where so many people have concerns about the buildings not being too tall.
So as we're talking about, therefore, having residential going out further north on North Greeley, do we have any sort of thinking in terms of what we would recommend that ought to be? We talked about this a little bit last time. Kanan just mentioned in her comments, having step ups, and is that what we would like to see? For example, we have the situation in 91 Bedford, but it's retail on that ground floor that has not been filled. It's a step down, but obviously, the way it's been built, to Tom's point, it would be very difficult to convert that to residential without a whole lot of changes. It seems to me that, last time we were moving in the direction of something that would look a little bit more like a traditional Georgetown type of town residential area, maybe some like the brownstones in Manhattan, where you have 3, 4, 5 steps up, some privacy for people. And then another issue was that perhaps that would enable us to have the parking behind and underneath this first floor. Might make some sense. What do we think about that? Again, not designing pieces of property, but in terms of livability and scale and walkability, as we want people to be out on the sidewalks. We want them to be coming down into town, coming to see events, whatever it might be.
It's still complicated.
So there would.
I'm sorry, sorry, go
No,
ahead.
go ahead, please.
I was just wondering if what we were saying is we don't want it to be flexible because there are all kinds of difficulties in sort of switching from one use to another. And
No,
and I mean, I do agree that it's not the easiest thing to do, but I'm just wondering if we are sort of locking ourselves to something. And what you're saying is for that given corridor, we can actually make a decision as to which side is retail and which side is residential, and then really just talk about residential types as the different. Is that right? I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Well, I guess what I was proposing was not like east side of the street versus west side of the street. I was proposing along the length of the street, you get to a point where it's residential, ground floor residential, retail up to a certain point, and then ground floor residential from there north, which happens, by the way, after the post office. I mean, it's residential back up in there.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
So that would be, that's the kind of break I'm talking about. Where that happens, I don't know. I mean, there are keys to where it should happen on the west side of the street. Do I have my directions right? I think so. On the
Rite Aid is on the west side.
thank you, the Rite Aid side of the street. Thank you, Sabrina.
Sure.
So the Rite Aid side of the street is a complete.
I'm with you, Tom. I'm listening.
Okay, good. On the Rite Aid side of the street, it's a completely different land sort of configuration, parcel situation. On the east side of the street, as we know, there are a whole bunch of sort of smaller parcels, and as I think Dick pointed out, there's the substation there, which is not going to go away. There's a public parking lot there, which I think we could have some creative ideas about, but that's not this conversation. That's probably farther down the road if we choose to have that kind of conversation.
If I may.
So there are different considerations. It's probably, I don't know whether it's, it's probably easier to do retail farther north. But no, I'm wrong about that because the parcels are so small. How are you going to get the parking lot?
Can I just put a point of reference for you guys in this discussion? On the east side, before the post office, after the parking lot and the substation, there used to be all first floor residential there. All of those houses have turned into commercial first floors.
Yes.
So I think that's an important reference for you. Because just up to the post office, it's all first floor commercial. It's kind of a little retail area in there, or an office area, service area, I should say. And it seems to work very well right now, between the opportunity shop and the yoga space, and there's a couple of other uses in there, which reflect a commercial use as opposed to first floor living. So I think that, you know, in exploration of consideration of a commercial area versus a residential area, I think anything north of the post office and behind the Rite Aid building would be very difficult to create additional retail,
No, I
just
agree.
due to topography and neighborhood.
Right.
But then
I would agree.
but then that leaves the west side, the only thing that really can be focused on development, you know, without tearing down other things, even though I agree totally that you've described it properly as to what exists with the mixed flexible, let's say, retail and housing. But how are we going to get more of that? The only way is to take those buildings down and build them up higher, one could say. Or you could take away Rite Aid and put housing over there and then be flexible as to what's on the first floor to see if, you know, you can't entice people to come. But it's none of those things are really much of a destination, which, you know, I still think we need at least a mini anchor over there if we're going to come up with something. And to me, it has to be, you know, I'm the only thing I feel comfortable with is, you know, really get a great restaurant in there and, you know, and have something that goes with it in the entertainment area. Of course, that may be very old fashioned. And I don't know that there are that many left of those of that nature.
Well, it seems to me that what we can recommend to the town board without obviously making the actual delineation is that there is some interest in seeing some sort of limitation as you move down the road, as we transition to all residential, that we lessen the commercial and the retail. You know, one other thing, does it make sense, Dick? I mean, along your lines is even if you have, you cut off, you know, your so-called retail, ground floor retail at, you know, I don't know, 500 feet away from the corner, whatever that means. And then it goes residential. To Sabrina's point, we already have some service or commercial on that side anyway. I can just imagine the uproar if we try to change that zoning and say it's going to be all residential, even though it's someone's living in a barn, you know, using a barn really for commercial operation. I mean, the whole point here is that we're looking to develop this thing beyond what we have now. So is it possible? And Tom and Kanan, you guys do this. Is it possible that you have a different? You even change your zone. You go 500 feet just commercial with residential upstairs, and then you go residential, and then you have a little pocket where you have a little retail space for Dick's point. Not that you legislate what kind of restaurant, but something that could be used as a restaurant.
No.
No, you can't.
Can't go
Well, I think you could try to do that, but you can't do that. I don't think you can do that. I mean, Sabrina can talk about that. I don't think you can say, okay, on this particular site, we are going to have a white tablecloth restaurant with entertainment.
Right.
I mean, that's, you know, if you want that, you got to go to another town where, you know, they have that. And the restaurants in particular are really, really difficult businesses, and they actually rely on visibility. You have to see them and know where they are. And if you're going to put a restaurant in, you want it to be closer to the intersection of North Greeley and King, where you drive by it all the time. There's a whole conversation we can have about restaurants and what works and what doesn't. So I don't think we can deal with specificity with regard to the tenancies in any of this.
I agree.
What I'd like to clarify, if I can, for my own purposes, when we talk about flexibility, there was Sabrina, unless I'm mistaken, there was a stipulation in the proposed form-based code that said that you needed to build retail space, but you could temporarily put residential in it until such time as retail became feasible. The retail tendencies became feasible. Is that correct?
There was something of that nature. If you documented, you could not tenant for retail or something like that.
Yeah, that was my recollection also. That was the flexibility that we were talking about.
Yeah.
So it would give the developer and the occupant some time, and perhaps even permit it so that maybe in 5 years they have to come back and talk about what their plans were. But I think the plan had been to build it so that it was going to be conducive to a retail commercial occupancy.
But in the interim, they could put something else in there, and presumably residential.
Correct.
See, that's where you get, I think that's where you get into trouble with the architectural side of it. I mean,
Yeah, and I would agree with that too.
So I
So,
think that makes good sense.
then-
So if I'm sorry, Dick, to your point, I think, let me see if I can help out here. If the flexibility we're talking about is that you can decide whether you want to build retail or residential, right?
yes,
Not have to build retail, and it can turn, and it should, but you can
Right.
temporarily, it'll be flexible to build residential.
it's
I
canon,
think that makes more
it's-
sense.
we're saying the same thing.
Okay.
So it's like we have the Rite Aid building, and it's I don't know what's it's gonna turn out to be, but I think that's the key to being more specific as to what's gonna happen next. You know, we can't opine yet even as to what that building should really be. Other than it should be something that is exciting and that will stand the test of 20 years or something like that. And that's what I think the focus should be. And then we can build around that if it makes sense. You know, if it's going to be a dollar kind of retail place, I don't think that's going to do much good. You know, so there's lots of things that wouldn't happen, but we need, like you said, Tom, that we need somebody to, you know, sit down and say, what are you interested in developing, given what you know about this town? So, but that should be the mini anchor in northern part of Greeley, in my opinion.
So one of the things I would argue is that retail in general, the kind of floor plates and, you know, the typology that we are used to is changing. Like for example, if we were to make this was to, you know, this space was to become a co-working space, for instance, it's still retail. Question is, does it adhere to the same requirements of a conventional retail space? So that's where I was going when I was saying flexible, that I feel like there are so many different uses that I can see that are going to be more focused on basically on what the community needs, right, in this community, and so those kind of businesses are what will stay, as opposed to us sort of saying, you know, this might be a nice restaurant spot, and so it needs to have the traditional parking spaces, it needs to have access from the back, it needs to have a certain depth, all of that. So I'm just questioning it. I'm not saying that we need to plan for it as such, but and I also agree that the North Corridor is a very limited space, and the idea that we already know the boundaries of what is commercial currently, and beyond that it's residential, and that's just fine. I mean, maybe we don't need to overthink this at all in this stretch of the, you know, of town, for sure. So, but that's the only point that I want to sort of bring up when we talk about retail, is that it could be a very varied mix of of retail spaces and what those needs are, in my opinion.
Well, Kanan, when you make that observation, are you suggesting that there would be built into what we're trying to do here, zoning that would drive different floor plate solutions in different places, or architectural solutions in different, or tenant kind of buildings, to get that level of specificity? Or
I don't know. That's what I'm trying to, I don't know. What I'm trying to say is that there will be different types of retail uses. And I can think of one which it seems very like, I think it would be snapped up if we had a co-working space in our town, right? Like, that's one thing I can think of right away. I can think of like pop-up stores, or so I just don't know how you build for that kind of flexibility. And I see what you're saying, that traditionally it is attached with a certain a number of parking spots, and then if we really stay that flexible, are we confusing the person who wants to build there, the developer, and you know, he's just like, make up your mind. What do you want? Like, I think this is what I can build here. So maybe it's a very clearly delineated up to where the pharmacy was, and where that retail on the other side is where the boundary ends. And then after that, it's just retail. And I'm sorry, and then it's just residential. And then we can just discuss what different types of residential we can accommodate there, and really sort of make it simple. But I just wanted to put this point out there, that I feel like retail conceptually, and I can find some of the things that I've been reading, I feel like it's changing everywhere, right? Like, even, I don't think it applies to our little town, but even how restaurants are being, you know, the idea that you have a common cooking space, but then you have 4 or 5 different types of businesses you're supporting from there. So there are different models of what we would call retail commercial. And I'm just wondering if this is something we need to think about, not for the North Corridor, maybe it's for a larger, you know, for the larger scheme when we do look at it.
Well, from my perspective, I think it would be useful to indicate that there is, we don't know what that line is, but some line where there should be an end of that area where ground floor retail is required. I'm not sure what that line is, and to Tom's point, maybe you start to talk to developers about that. And the reason why I think it's important to talk about residential is then because if you're not going to have, we've always presumed that we're going to have this, for the most part, ground floor commercial, ground floor retail with residential on top. When you start to have residential opportunities on the ground floor, to me, it changes the entire much of what the architecture should be, livability will be, scale, etc. So as soon as we start talking about that, for me on North Greeley, I'm thinking 4 stories, and the height of 4 stories is wrong, because I think we're going to, first of all, require so much more parking. And number 2, you have the ability to have people on the ground floor, so you can have your full 3 floors of residential, and you can build it in a fashion that is something that we've seen before in towns, which seem to be very, very successful in terms of what people like and where they like to live. And that is, you know, this architectural, you know, walk-up type of thing on the ground floor, then the other floors on top of that, townhouses, whatever it might be. And it first of all, to me, if we're going to have residential on the ground floor, I'm not interested in seeing a traditional apartment building in town. It's, to me, it's nauseating. You know, if you want to see some real garbage, come down to Pleasantville, see what they're putting up, and what that's going to be in terms of the scalability for this village. It is going to change the scale, the scope of the appearance, and in my opinion, and not for the better. So once you decide that you're not going to have retail or commercial on the ground floor, it seems to me it gives you other opportunities for what that residential is going to look like, and to get your spaces in there and to make it very, very attractive, very, very livable. We talk about, you know, who we want to have in there and this kind of stuff. That's a different subject, but it just seems to me at all levels, it makes it a much more livable, something that I think comports with what the vast majority of people in the town would like to see or have it look like.
Well, what's interesting to me is that your concerns about the apartment building, the generic apartment building that might potentially land on Greeley. It seems to me that the proposed form-based code really was concerned about that, and in their architectural stipulations about how these things are to be designed in order to sort of do all the things to try and get at what your concern is. And while I thought that they really went overboard on the style part, I think that generally speaking, the scale part of it was really pretty well done. And how it addresses the street and so on. And so those things can, some of them could be borrowed and put into a new code, or one could rely on the Architectural Review Board, who do a very good job, I think, and the Planning Board to do our job to sort of address those concerns. So I do think, though, that because, and I think I'm right about this, this conversation is about retail, and we're not talking about housing yet. But if you're going to do 10,000 square feet of what do you value more? 10,000 square feet of retail, or if you do the parking calculations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, 30 residential units, right? And that's a real value judgment. I mean, that's a serious sort of public policy value judgment about what are we really promoting here.
Yep.
Because that's not exactly the trade-off, but that's the kind of trade-off which I think is in play here. And I think that the northern part of Greeley, the lots are small. I understand there is a problem there, but the northern part of Greeley is where the retail demand is the least, and the opportunity to get more housing in. And it's not just market rate housing, it's a commensurate affordable housing, which is another important public policy goal. Gives us the opportunity to start building some of that stuff now, instead of waiting until, you know, the next iteration of whatever the town board decides that they want to do with other parcels in town, which is a much bigger subject and will take much longer to do. So I kind of think that in retail, more is not more. It's just not more. I mean, it's not, it doesn't make it, it's just more, but it's not better, right? In fact, the more demand there is on a retail space, the better store you get out of it. Because the better stores can have better merchandise, and they can pay more for those. And you really kind of tend to upgrade the retail environment by that consequence, I guess is the way to say it. So we are going to have a conversation about housing, but I think that we really ought to keep in mind the opportunity cost of retail is maybe a really relatively big impact on what the housing goals might be, and what do we value more.
Yep, that was my point. You articulated far better, but that's exactly my point. And that's why I think it's important for us to communicate to the town board those thoughts, and let them know that more is not necessarily more of that. And in fact, there are significant opportunity costs with continuing with this retail is king, and we got to have retail. And there's this whole notion that somehow just building more of everything automatically is just going to be just the exact right balance, and it's going to bring the activity to the town. And I just think that's not quite accurate. It's a very complicated issue, very complicated equation. Because and by the way, in addition to parking, it seems to me that the traffic issues are different for retail versus residential as well. So that's another element that we bring to North Greeley. And do we want to do that in those transition zones as we move toward a transition zone? So it seems to me, I don't think we can solve it until the town board, it's 275.6 feet down the sidewalk, and that's where it should be. But I think to get the notion out there that the southern part of North Greeley is where it's at for retail. The northern part is probably the opportunity for residential, both sides of the street. Obviously you have to look at the configurations of land. You got the railroad, all these kinds of issues to think about. But in the grand picture, after all, we're not going to be sitting here planning, which buildings are going where, who's going to buy it and who's going to build it. We just want to give those kinds of, I think, guidelines for the town board to come up with the zoning plan.
So I do like Sabrina's point about you looking at where the sort of commercial boundaries are today and sort of use that as a way to indicate that, you know, retail's working up to this point, and beyond that, it makes sense for, so it's the post office on one end, and it's the large, what used to be the pharmacy and beyond, right? Like up to that point being retail, and then beyond that, maybe it's residential. The second point is, I do agree that it is, if this is just me personally, I think that by adding more housing units in this corridor, we're sort of getting ahead of what those goals are. And also that's what, in my opinion, finally going to make downtown work, right? Like when we say footfall, that's coming from people who live around, who want to walk around there, who are going to walk through there. And so from that perspective, yeah, I absolutely agree that if we have to make a decision between 30 units and, I don't know, that kind of retail, I would pick the 30 units personally. So
Sabrina, can I ask a question of you? Because now I'm getting a little bit confused. The boundaries of this, of the district we're talking about, the proposed zoning district that we're talking about, what's the northern boundary?
Hang on a minute, let me go to my map.
Is it just beyond the post office, or is it go?
No, it goes a little bit further to Maple, I want to say. Hang on, let me go in there.
when you get to the point where you take a right turn to go uphill, is that that road?
That's the post office.
It's a little beyond the
It's to Bischoff.
Bischoff. Okay.
It goes to Bischoff, so it goes Maple is just after the post office, and then it goes up to Bischoff.
The next block.
Yes,
Yeah.
the next block.
But it's residential right now, right?
That is residential all the way that you have the post office, and then starts the commercial in the houses on the east side.
Going south though, right?
Yes, going south.
Yeah.
Right.
And I
So-
think when you go up Bischoff, there are a couple of houses there that
Right.
are like a music school, or, you know, it's
Yep.
just, yeah, they're still in a house setting, but it's a commercial use, I think.
It's
Yes,
like-
yes, they have not changed the footprint of the house to add a commercial service use in there.
Mhm.
And
It's
I'm gonna
sort of
say
like-
service because you have things like yoga studios and music lessons.
It's like
Right.
personal service stuff.
Yes, personal
Like-
service.
Most of that's quarter acre, isn't it?
Yeah,
Seems
I'm gonna
right.
share a map with you guys in a moment.
So while you're getting that up, Sabrina, I also think that it would not be a bad idea, because parking really is a part of the development program, right? And it drives so much that parking isn't on our list, but should there be a conversation about parking? I know that there were a lot of strategies and tactics that were suggested in the form-based code. I don't know, Sabrina, if the town board is thinking about moving some of those things forward into this.
I can't answer as to what the town board is doing at
Okay.
this point. I think your board is much more advanced in discussing the topics that you guys have selected to discuss regarding this.
Well, they have a lot more work to do on other things.
So I'm sharing with you right now the map
There you
that
go.
is being promulgated with the moratorium. If you look up top here, where
Yep.
Bischoff is, and you can see this is an aerial base, so you can see the single family homes.
Right.
Here's the music store is at the corner of Bischoff. The house used for music lessons. And as I scroll down, you can see the post office.
Ah, okay.
Okay, and then we go down further. Here on the east side are the smaller lots. Quarter acre, single family homes. You can see the stars, the blue stars in the corner is town-owned lands. And then in front of the blue star that's further north is the utility
Substation.
building.
Okay,
So-
good.
Is the blue strip, is just that easel? It's
Yeah,
that,
just the
like,
area behind that
Okay,
building.
so it's just, yeah, I get it.
I'm trying to get it on one page for you. There you go.
Yeah. I think what's going to be the odd one is this stretch.
You can
next to
draw
the-
on the screen.
Oh, I can.
Yes, please do.
Okay, let me try doing this. I knew there was a way to do it. Hold on.
Don't fail us, Kanan. She will never even ask me to try to
I
do it.
know, I know. It's a lot of
No pressure, Kanan, no pressure.
Hold on.
Take your time, breathe. It's okay.
Where was this? I've done it before.
You have.
My
Um,
approach is with a hammer.
Highlight your computer screen up. For me, it's up at the top. If you're on a Mac, I'm not sure where that comes up, but
I'm in on the Mac, and viewing options is where I see it, but
Is it that crayon or pencil up there?
Yeah,
Where?
but you can't access it. I'm trying.
where is it?
I can't make anything happen
you
here.
guys can't write on this.
Well, I'm on a Mac, so I don't.
It would help.
That's Mac people.
Yeah, I can't access. the
So
pen.
describe it and I'll draw
Yeah,
it for you.
Okay, so right up from like where the Rite Aid is, the next property up, that long little stretch there. Yeah, that whole thing, like I think that's going to be the challenge, right? Like what are we putting in like that to me?
But I can tell you, and I'll share with you that I have seen plans over the
Pocket
years.
park or yeah,
I've seen
don't-
plans over the years to do housing on this property.
Right, it'll work. You can make
It
work.
will work, and the elevation actually fits quite nicely with the road.
You can make it work.
Yeah.
I've tried it, and I think it
How-
will work.
How deep is it? Do you know?
I don't know offhand.
That's it.
We're not site planning, but let's put it this way. I've seen plans
Okay,
that fit housing in here nicely.
okay,
And it's-
Okay.
then it's actually great because then you actually have two sides of the street and if you're
Yes,
building
with a
from
sidewalk,
garage
a whole 9 yards. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's really, let me draw something. I don't draw nearly as well as Bob draws. But if I was to draw a commercial line,
Yeah,
There you
That's-
go.
That's
Okay.
exactly my thoughts. Yep.
agreed.
And some of that could be mixed
absolutely.
and
Well,
flexible.
it'd be mixed use, residential retail on top.
Yep.
Yeah.
or
That's
retail
the
and a lot of
area.
residential
And I
on
think,
top.
I understand you guys talk about having an anchor or a draw or something like that. I don't know if there's enough land area
No.
here to get the draw that you guys want.
I don't,
Right.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Sabrina.
Well, no, so I was just gonna say, this is part and parcel, to doing better than we have now. That, there may be movements in the future to really focus on the rest of the hamlet, but right now, this is the area that we can focus on, that we can improve to help meet some of the goals of the comprehensive plan. And
Right.
so, I think that there's some really good opportunity here from a planning perspective, and it's a matter of you guys providing your comments to the town board.
Yep.
So I think that this, not only does it just make sense, and I think in terms of its length, right, in terms of a walkable length and then walk back, it also has a definitive sort of end, right? You can see to the end of it, and there's a sort of a visual key that this is the shopping part of this street.
Yep.
And it just could work very well as a unit if it's sort of
Mhm.
figured out properly and
Yep.
zoned properly. It could be great.
So let me ask you, here's a question that I think the town board would benefit greatly in your feedback, right? In the form-based code, let me change my color. The commercial area was here and stopped here. For all intents and purposes,
Right.
right?
Odd. Okay.
Given what's going on this side of the street here, what are your thoughts regarding commercial the entirety of this street? This frontage?
I think it makes good sense. That's exactly the area that I had in mind for the delineation.
I think that was, that's what I was thinking also.
Agreed. Agreed. And also,
because I think it's important in whatever communication you provide to the town board, you speak to what you envision regarding the extent of the commercial area, because the form-based code area stopped it here, like in a very odd way, in my mind.
that's really because isn't Rite Aid considered commercial? Like, isn't that triangular space Rite Aid right there?
Yes, it is, but they were reconfiguring this space to only have required commercial there.
Well, I thought it was also on the other side of the street. I thought it was both sides of the street.
Well, it was here.
No, from where the parking lot is down to the corner.
From here.
No, higher up where the parking lot is.
This
From
is
the top of the parking.
you mean, are you talking about Rite Aid's parking lot?
No, where the
Right
public,
side.
I'm sorry. What's that?
Because here's the parking lot right here.
No, I'm sorry, you're right. So it also included the next parcel up, I think.
The
There down.
utility building?
Yeah, from there down. I thought that was all retail and then it was matched on the other side. I could be wrong, but I think, I think
Substation is not retail, is it?
Understandable, but it was zoned that way.
zoning.
That was the recommendation, but honestly, if you're looking at this, there's a big difference between that and what the form-based code set forth. And so I just want to point out for the board, if this is your preferred vision, you should include that as your preference to the town board, because they don't understand that at this point.
Okay.
So the next question I would have about this before we say, yay, we like this, for the size lots we're talking about, how much development can you actually get on those lots which are on the east side of the street? If you're going to put retail there, can you put any residential on those lots? You know, how much can you put on those lots? And that's where you get to the, the opportunity cost. I don't know.
Is that with the existing buildings or taking the existing buildings down?
Well, you'd be for redevelopment.
Yeah,
If it was
redevelopment, taking them down.
Yeah.
If it was for redevelopment, why are you saying we would still have to stick with those lot sizes? I mean, wouldn't there be some configuration of combining the lots to then?
That's where we get into the combination of the lots. If we're talking about redevelopment, and if there's no redevelopment, then they're going to stay
Exactly.
as they are today, and we don't want to make them non-conforming uses.
No, we're not going to make them non-conforming uses. I mean, I don't know. I mean, they could be grandfathered in. I don't know. I mean, but Kanan, I guess my point is that in order to do the kind of retail that maybe we're talking about successfully and do residential, you would have to combine those lots.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And that would be an impediment, a disincentive to do anything there and make it more difficult to develop there. So I'm just wondering, what are the logical consequences of making this kind of a recommendation? And I think that parking tends to be, a consideration, how we're going to solve, how that would get solved. I mean, what we want to propose is something which would be feasible within our children's lifetimes, maybe.
Well, it seems to me that any kind of redevelopment is going to require some sort of a combination of these lots. And once that is done, it seems to me that there has to be some sort of element of underground parking. I'm hoping that this is out of the Corps of Engineers swamp area. I think it is, compared to further south on Greeley.
Yeah, I think so too, but
And I would argue that there has to be some sort of smarter strategy to reduce the amount of parking needed for this retail slash, considering how close it is to mass transit, hopefully bus lines. I would just see that as being the right way to go for us. But I like the idea of like maybe looking at some of what was there in the parking in what was suggested in the form-based code to deal with that, to, consider some options there.
Well, I agree. The only exception I take to those was I thought some of those were unrealistic. And it's one thing to hope that that's what works out, but there's nothing that can kill an area more quickly than inadequate parking. So I would take the parking underground would be for the residential area, and then on-street parking for the retail. Hopefully that would be sufficient, and hopefully that would work. There are some opportunities for, parking, further down on South Greeley, but realistically, it's a walk. And I wonder, you can impose that in the plan and say, well, it's gonna be walkable, so people will walk, but realistically, 4 or 5 months of the year, that's not gonna happen.
Yeah, the interesting, the one example I always think about is in Pleasantville, you have that little street where all the retail, like these little restaurants and everything is, and then there's this massive parking lot right across the street. So, but still, like that is full and people are just circling and parking in wrong spaces instead of just like parking across the street and walking through what seems to be retail friendly walkable space. So it just blows my mind. But
Yes.
yeah, I mean, the parking, just that one street is a prime example, right? It's like slightly uphill.
Yep.
And there's retail, like there are little restaurants everywhere, and it's, the parking's full on both sides, and there's always confusion about how do I find a spot, as opposed to like, here's an empty lot right across and we just park there and walk.
Yep.
So,
Well, I don't think we have to solve that. I think we have to make the observation that there are parking issues each way. But I think one of the conclusions is that the parking issue becomes a little bit more difficult when we have more retail. Even though we're proposing more than the form-based code had.
So I don't know whether, how the town board would approach, whether they would approach this concern. They maybe would decide that it's not enough of a concern to approach it, but one way to check it out is just to do some quick test fits. Don't take any specific lots there, because you don't want to have people think that you're trying to, design their future for them. But take just 3 generic lots or 2 generic lots or 4 generic lots of those sizes and do some test fits and see, how much parking can you get on there. But as Kanan says, a lot of the town parking policies needs to be sorted out in order to see what is actually practical and reasonable. Like on-street parking, there's a chance for a lot of on-street parking on that street, for example. There is a public parking lot there. How do you make that available? And do our ratios make any sense anymore? Which I think was Kanan's main point on that subject.
Yep.
So you could do a capacity fit and then see, well, what does that yield in terms of the number of cars, and then apply those strategies and those numbers and see what you might need to do to your parking ratios or your parking locations or your public parking policies. Like there's a policy in place where there's what's it called? There's a parking district. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. We can utilize the parking district notion to see if there's a way to be more efficient about what we're doing. But I think it's kind of hard to talk about 3 stories versus 4 stories versus ground floor commercial and versus ground floor retail versus ground floor residential, without really knowing, how many cars are there and where do they go? Because you may never get to 4 stories because you can't park all those cars, for example. So why would it be an issue?
But I think I like your idea of like the way to figure this out is do a generic test fit for the entire area. Like I wouldn't even say do it for a few lots, like just do it for the entire stretch, imagining what if we built it up 2 stories, then what's the number of parking spots you will need? If you built it up 3 stories, what would the parking requirement be based on the retail on the ground floor versus not? And then just sort of work our ways backwards as to what is our parking today, what's our requirement and how much can we do away with, and sort of find that change in the balance. But the point needs to be made that there will need to be a reconfiguration of the number of parking spots, the ratio of parking, and then that can only be determined by doing these test fits across that stretch.
Well, there is a test fit that has been done for this stretch from King Street up to the post office.
Oh, really?
There was a test fit that was done under the form-based code. Again, the standards were different, the requirements were different. I think that, in order to do a test fit, the parameters that you guys are discussing regarding ceiling height and the retail area are important, are important inputs into the test fit, and then to test the different heights. 2 stories residential above, 3 stories residential above. Again, like suggestion to the town board of where you want to extend the first floor retail area to, the idea of the test fit, particularly on the east side of the corridor, needs to be recommended to the town board.
Yeah, so maybe we could close it here if it's time to close.
Well, I have 2 points that would go into a memo that you had not previously discussed. It's unclear to me and to Felicia what you want to include based on the write-up that Bob, you had submitted, and Tom, you had submitted. We had a much more directed conversation tonight regarding retail and parking.
And the extent of retail, right? I feel like
Yes.
we all sort of agree on the extent of the retail corridor.
Subject to those capacity tests,
I'm sorry, Bob, hard to hear you.
Subject to the tests that we do for parking.
Yes.
So we would add a bullet point. Let's just, if we want to work from the draft that I happen to do, if we want to add a point 8 or wherever you want to put it, which is or insert it in one of the other ones, our suggestion for now anyway, our suggestion for the extent of ground floor retail going up to, what is it, Maple?
Yes. So the question I have for you, Tom, regarding your memo, you have the summary of the discussion. Do you want the town board to see all points 1 through 7, or did you want to call that down just to give them more pointed direction?
No, I think all through 7, all of them.
Does everyone agree with that?
Yeah,
Unless
I think, yeah, subject to, yeah.
I do.
Right, I think we should have it all there.
Unless somebody disagrees with, any particular point, I think that it's.
Well, I think this lays it out, but I think there should also be a summary in terms of what we're making the recommendation for. And I think the recommendation might be culled down to something along the lines of, here's where we're thinking, but we don't have the answer here because we think we need to do some capacity testing.
Well,
that will provide us with the yield information that we need to have.
yeah, I was gonna say that there's a caveat or a closing sentence or two that says essentially that these recommendations are or these observations, if you want to call them, I don't know what you're going to call them. I'm not sure they necessarily be recommendations, but we can make them if you want them to be, that are really preliminary. I mean, they're conditioned on, we still want to look at housing. We still want to look at affordability. We still want to building height. And we also still, I think, now want to look at parking.
Yes.
And that these are just our discussion points for now. But we have a general consensus on these for now. And
yeah, one point, to me, what we're talking about is really starting out with the land that is on the west side of Greeley, right? And we're going to not really do a lot initially with what's on the east side, because there's a lot of complications. So that I think that, you know, that parcel, the triangular parcel, might end up being, you know, retail on the bottom with something substantial or a lot of little things. And then higher up would be residential. So, you know, I'm saying, well, gee, focus on the west side first and see what developers would like to try and do. We could see you need to have address the driving issues, the parking issues, I should say, and that suggests that you're going to go underground or you're going to build the first floor, and that's all going to be parking, and then everything else is going to be above it if it's you know, in the residential section of the west side.
well, are we talking now about a different zoning from the east side to the west side? I don't think that that's.
I don't know. I mean, if somebody may come in and want to, you know, just blow the building down.
Well, I think we should zone for the entire area of the street,
Right.
both sides. I don't think we
Right.
should dissect it. It
All
is, I think you're correct, Dick. I think it's unreasonable to expect something will happen sooner on the east side, but I think the plan for us is to project out in advance and give the roadmap for people to, so that we understand what we're looking for as a community for that area. I think anyone reasonable will conclude that that's going to require a combination of lots, and people are going to have to get together and figure this out. And that's a whole other story. But I would not recommend that we just look at the west side. I think we should zone for the whole area up to a certain, whatever point it is that we're comfortable with.
Well, then divide it into phases. If you want to look at the whole side, fine, but you know, then the place to start, which I think the town board already knows, is on the west side.
But
The east side has more complications. I'm not trying to avoid it. I'm just
Right,
saying,
but I think it's important that the planning board weighs in on the entire area. And then, you know, when it comes to implementation, I think you can make recommendations on how you envision implementation of this, but that is really depending on the mechanism of private property owners and the mechanism within which the town board decides to implement the proposed zoning. Right?
The town isn't developing this property.
Correct. Like we're zoning it. So if I may make a suggestion and tell me if you guys agree, I can take Tom's memo and kind of massage it a little bit based on this conversation, you know, change discussion to observations, really point out the main points, and then make the recommendation. You know, you guys discuss the extent of the commercial area, if there's going to be a commercial area, is, you know, because this memo speaks to more residential first floor than retail first floor right now. And so I don't know if you want to change that point, or you want to kind of
flexible. Make it flexible.
play both sides.
Yeah.
And if it is going to be retail, the extent of your retail area, and then talk about your test fit and add parking in here.
Well, I thought the conclusion we were going to say retail required up to Maple. And then after that, ground floor. And then after that, it would be residential.
Is that what everybody thinks? Because this memo says otherwise right now.
Well, don't forget that once you go past Maple, that on the left side as you're going north, it's heavily treed. There's a lot of trees there. And so that's
right.
That's partly to lessen the sound, I guess, for the houses on the right-hand side.
Here, let me share this screen again.
And I know how to draw now.
Ah, you do?
Too
Fantastic.
late, too late.
Again, looking at this triangle here, this,
Yeah,
that's your endpoint for your commercial first floor.
Agreed.
Right.
Okay,
right.
and I can go so far as to attach a little screenshot of this with
Sure.
marking
Yeah,
on
that
it,
would be very helpful.
And I
right?
think we should just label it Sabrina's Corner so that they fully understand where it is.
Yeah, so it's not Maple, it's to the
It's just
post office.
before, it's the end of the right, it's the northern tip of the Rite Aid lot and the southern boundary of the post office lot.
This is exactly
Okay,
why,
that's fine.
this is exactly why a screenshot diagram would help.
Yes. So I can do that. I know
Great.
what I know what you would like.
Perfect, perfect.
Nan, did you want to draw on this since you know how?
No,
Good.
you know, that's exactly what you were saying. It's just, it was bothering me. So
Okay, no worries. So I can pull together a draft. Is this something that the entire board wants to see? Do you want Bob to kind of spearhead it and approve it? What is your pleasure?
I'd like to see it.
Well, yeah, if I promise not to gum up the works. If you send it to me, I'd be happy to help out.
Okay, so let me try and put together a draft working with Felicia over the next couple days, get some diagrams in there for you guys to review and you see what comes back, okay?
Great.
I will do it in Microsoft Word so you guys can track changes.
Very good, thank you.
Okay,
Excellent.
So, Bob,
That's pretty up to date, isn't it? Microsoft Word?
yes.
Well,
Do not use Google Docs, please.
no,
Okay.
That was beyond us, remember?
That's what I mean. Yeah, I am not using Google Docs.
yeah, but Microsoft is now into a version.
Good old fashioned Word, people.
So, Bob, before we leave this, real quick, the next time we talk about North Greeley, I think that Kanan, you had a suggestion or a question of why we were separating out affordability from multifamily housing. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
yeah, so the way I look at it, affordability is, I would like to think it should be the financial construct of it, not necessarily our ability to, I understand that we have to come up with, we want 10% affordable of all the units we decide to build, 10% want to be, or whatever that number is, right? 10, 20, 5%, whatever it is. But my point is, we need to think about housing. Like affordability is a policy issue as far as I'm concerned. And then everything else is us talking about how much housing do we want there and why? Because in my opinion, it is really putting on a very clear, like it is taking away this lens or this, if we decide that we want to think about it separately, it sort of forces us to think about, even remotely think about different options, which I wouldn't want. Like I would want us to think about housing as if it didn't matter who was living there. We're just thinking about the number of units we want and why we want that. And then the policy discussion really wants to be about how many units or do we want to see, like what percentage of this we want affordable to what extent, right? Like, is this 80% of the area's median income? And that's a very different discussion. I think it is more for a developer. Like we can have a policy decision and say we want a certain number of affordable units, but if we go down that route, then we land up with having the kind of situation we have with that property where we've decided to sandwich a certain group of people between the railway track and the Sawmill Parkway. And that's what I want to avoid, us sort of thinking in that way.
So I agree with you. And my thought was that there's the product, which is housing, right? And it's a universal market solution. And then as a sub part of that, there is what percentage of that product is made available through affordable housing strategies, whether it's, you know, I don't know, whether it's subsidizing or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And so it was intended to be, okay, do we really think that, you know, 10% is right? I mean, is it right that if you do 5 units, you have to provide an affordable housing for 5 units, 1 unit, that's 20%. So I thought that was an important policy discussion we could have.
Yes, yes, and
I
that
agree
we
with
should.
you.
That we should. I just, yeah, I just don't want to get into a place where we're making decisions on like certain properties, for example, being affordable versus not.
No, nobody would do that.
No, we are, you know, I keep pointing to, go look at the Reader's Digest, you'll see what we think about mixed housing, multifamily housing. And that's the solution you want to see. But I will say this, to a certain extent, you know, we talked about market, you know, you can impose these kinds of numbers and percentages, but ultimately it's going to be up to the developer, it's going to be up to the cost, it's going to be up to what they can do in a good quality manner. And, you know, I want to go back to the beginning. This was not an affordable housing initiative. And I'm going to stand on that and fight it, because that is an element. But this was a diversity of housing options given to older people who want to downsize, senior housing, affordable housing, workforce housing, you name it, as well as market. And that, I think, is the vitality. And I'm not going to sit around and make believe that this was an affordable housing initiative. I know I'm going to run all kinds of flack on that, and I don't care, because it makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Can I just say two? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, can we not have the conversation tonight?
Yeah.
Okay.
The only reason I raised it was to try and figure out what we're going to talk about, you know, how we're going to talk about what we're going to talk about.
Well, I think, again, we have to get some feeling on the parking on this. And I guess we can also go into housing, because housing is very important.
So that's for next time.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I agree.
Good. Okay. Before we have the minutes, I did want to discuss, I talked to Sabrina, I talked to Bob, and I talked to Jennifer about this, also Dennis. What do we want to do as we move forward with our meetings? So this is the last one, presumably, that we will have where we are authorized to meet remotely under Zoom, or, you know, remotely. And from my standpoint, it has shown to me that the technology is here. And my personal take on it would be that, you know, the planning board, the board members, to the greatest extent possible, should be meeting at town hall in person for these meetings. But I think the opportunity for applicants, for their professionals, for our staff, depending upon the application, can be there or can be working remotely. I don't know if anyone is tuned in, but, you know, the town board has been working there in town hall, and it's been a hybrid. Most people in the business world, institutional, well, not the institutional world, but certainly the business world, have really moved to a hybrid model, where people are working, you know, in person as well as remotely. And it seems to be the way of the future. I've been impressed with the technology. And again, I've tuned in a couple of times with the town board. I've seen actual, you know, town board members on Zoom while 3 or 4 are there in person. Applicants or members of the public can appear either in public, in person, or Zoom. So I just want to get thoughts from folks. I know Tom did respond to my note. Dick and Kanan have not. I haven't heard anything from Eldad on this as well. So I just want to get your thoughts. And Jennifer ought to just tell us first about what the law might be on this, by the way, so that we don't get into problems.
Yeah, so what the law might be. So we know what the law is now. We don't know what the law might be after the legislature, you know, potentially considers amendments to the open meetings law. So currently, if you're a board member and you're participating in the meeting virtually or by phone, you have to publicly notice your location, which means, if you're participating from home, we'd have to put a public notice out saying, Chairman Kirkwood will be participating in this meeting from his home at such and such address. And members of the public technically are invited to attend the meeting from Chairman Kirkwood's home or wherever he may be participating from. So that's what the open meetings law provides now. My understanding is that there's some discussion at the state level about amending the open meetings law to provide for virtual participation without having to publicly notice your location. So, but that's yet to be seen. We don't know if that's going to be proposed or adopted, but that's the current state of the law. So that's something that you should consider when you're deciding whether to participate at town hall or remotely.
How much notice is required?
It would typically, as much as practicable, but typically we would put it out with the agenda notices and with the public hearing notices that have to go out, and there's certain time periods for those.
Works for me.
So
I think we should do this hybrid. Because I think it's there are savings here and there that make some sense, and and people can come and be there in public in person if they wish, or stay home.
I mean, I have had situations where I have done this meeting from a different city, and I think that's if I have that option, I would like to keep it. I'm not saying that I can always do it, but if that is, and hybrid just helps once in a while where you have young children and there's two of us and I just need to be home and still be.
I think that the members would be in town hall, and the staff and applicants would be virtual if they wished.
Oh, and I honestly, I've seen that, and I think I think I went to, I had a parking ticket in, I forget which town at this point, but literally I went into this room and none of the board members were there, and it was just a computer open, and then the applicants came up to it and talked into the screen, which I thought was absolutely bizarre, but so I mean, I've seen that version too, not too long ago. So like literally you go up to that, and then and I think it was like the traffic judge or whoever was on Zoom from home or wherever, and you just went up to the screen, and for the longest time I couldn't figure out where's the judge. Like there were just all these people sitting. It was just bizarre. So
Jennifer, is it a requirement that for a board meeting that at least 3 of us would have to be physically in town hall under this kind of a scenario, or not?
I don't believe so. I think under the current open meetings law, someone's participation via Zoom or via telephone counts towards quorum. That's my understanding, and I think that's part of the purpose, so that you don't have quorum issues and people can participate from a remote location, subject to the noticing requirements.
I hate to be there by myself.
So in essence,
you can have
end up right where we are right now.
Yeah, I mean, you can have a board policy that you're strongly encouraging your board members to be there physically in person at town hall. But if there's a one-off situation where, for Kanan's example, if she's traveling and, but for her that she wouldn't otherwise be able to attend the meeting unless she's participating from her hotel room or from the hotel lobby, that might be a perfect opportunity to allow Kanan to continue to participate in the discussions of the board and the review of the applications, even though she's traveling, where, the other 3 or 4 members of the board may be physically in town hall. So it gives some flexibility for the board members.
So my feeling is that, for those those special circumstances where you literally cannot be there. I think that Zooming in should be available and actually expected. I mean, physically can't be there, but can be there in the time slot is something that would be terrific if we can, utilize that technology for that. Otherwise, I think that if you're in town and you can be there, I think you should be there. I really think that it's really important for the functioning of small town government that people have a chance to actually physically come and petition, the actual people who are administering their application. And to have it computerized, I think, takes away from that. And I don't see a need to do that other than, gee, we just don't want to go to town hall. We'd rather stay at home. So I understand that businesses are giving people the option, but we aren't a business, right? We're a public institution and we answer to the public. And I think that that's important.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, I agree with you. And I think it's really important for members. I mean, my intention would be, after this meeting, I would make every effort to, as I've always done, to physically appear at town hall and be there. And I would hope that would be what everyone will try to do. But I certainly do understand life is complicated and there are demands and pullings on all of us all the time. And again, I haven't seen any kind of, from the standpoint of staff and input from staff, I certainly haven't seen any kind of problems or difficulties. I actually hear Bob Cioli better over Zoom than live. But anyway, it's we'll play it by ear, I guess. But I think Tom, you make a good point. Businesses are businesses, and municipal government is something else. And I think if you want to serve on this board, you should make every effort. I think it's important to be here in person, be at town hall in person. Staff, I think in some cases, look, if it's going to be a very, very light meeting, and for example, there's not going to be very much in terms of environmental issues, and Dennis has a long drive or something, I think that makes it a little bit looks a little crazy. I think long drives at night, and weather conditions are poor, I think that's a real consideration. I would like to have people have that flexibility if the meetings are not going to suffer. And I don't think they do, but for the standpoint of staff.
Well,
So,
I think that staff is a kind of a special situation. First of all, it's not up to us, right? I mean, the staff actually works for the town, not for us. But I think that staff already really has a pretty close relationship with applicants because they meet with them ahead of time. They hear them, they advise them. I think that it would be less important. I wouldn't worry about Bob Cioli not physically being there or Sabrina not being there because I trust them to already have that kind of relationship, the personal sort of relation, not personal, but face-to-face relationship with the client where the applicant where they've established they've established that. So for me, it would be up to them. If the town board says it's up to them, I'm perfectly okay with that, and I'll trust them to know when it's important to be here.
I can tell you, as a rule of measure for me, Tom, you're correct. I mean, we all work with the applicants on many applications, during the day and through our own Zoom meetings with them often. But I think, like with a public hearings, big public hearings or controversial projects, I think it's important to be in town hall when we're expecting the public to be there. A meeting like tonight, we've had 3 listeners all evening who are listening via Zoom because it's easy to listen via Zoom. We've had much more participation from non-affiliated application participants via Zoom. And I want to make sure that that's still available for folks because it's a good way to get people involved in local government through Zoom. But I think that it's important for us to be there, for public hearings, for controversial projects, just to give support to the board. But like, for example, a meeting like tonight, if you guys were in town hall, I don't see anything inhibiting by having staff being remote, right? We had one application, we had a very healthy discussion, and we're gonna approve a whole bunch of minutes.
Yep.
So that's kind of my perspective. I mean, I think that, you know, we are all very in tune with what's going on with the board and when we need to be present versus not.
I like that idea that if it appears it's going to be a lot of people that want to, you know, understand and ask questions, then that's the exception of late. That's when we all should be in.
That's the
Now-
exception for just the staff or for all of us? That was, I mean, or are we saying that?
I think the board needs, I think the board needs to be in town hall, right?
Yep.
Unless you have a circumstance that prevents you from being in town hall, we have the ability to Zoom you in.
Okay.
Yep. And my sense is that that's exactly what the town board's doing. I haven't tuned in to see what the zoning board is doing at this point. Does anyone know?
Not yet, not yet.
Okay.
I think they're gonna allow the flexibility for staff as well. You know, because, you know, to be quite honest with you, a lot of town staff, town employees we live very far away from town.
Yeah,
The
no,
majority.
no, it's-
Whatever
it's-
Sabrina said on this topic, I agree 100%.
How about we move along?
Let's do some minutes.
Okay, but we have a good sense
Oh,
that.
there's an idea.
Right, so, I don't know if we'll do a memo or anything like this, but the bottom line is, I think the next time we meet, unless there's going to be another change, another extension, we'll be meeting in town hall personally, in person, for board members, unless we can't. But then I guess you have to give notice to Felicia and Sabrina if you're not going to be there, so we can make sure that the technology is available for you. So don't just, you know, call
We
up.
also have to post notice too. If a board member is not going to be in town hall, we must publish your whereabouts for the world to know.
We might stop in and do a spot check, so we'll see. So we'll just see how important this need was. All right. So
We're
minutes.
losing you, Bob, so we better do the minutes.
Okay. So the minutes, we have November 3rd.
November 3rd?
November 3rd, we can all vote on these. We're all there. I had a couple minor things which I'll just again email to you, Felicia. Very minor, not substantive. Anyone else, any changes, any substantive changes, concerns?
I have none.
Okay, if not, is there a motion to adopt the minutes for the meeting of November 3rd, subject to minor non-substantive changes?
Motioned.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. We have the minutes of November 16. Kanan, you were not there, so I guess it probably would not be appropriate to vote on them, unless you have to watch all the television and everything else. But in any event, we three were there, so we can handle these. Again, I had a couple of minor changes on this. Anyone else, anything?
No.
Issues?
Nope.
Okay, is there a motion to adopt the meeting minutes of November 16?
So moved.
Was that a second, Dick?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. We move now to the minutes of December 7. Again, any changes, issues?
Yeah, I have some questions.
Yes, sir.
Let's see, I'm on page. What is this, page 4? In line 57, I'm a little confused here that we have early public hearing. Okay, it seems that when I read down on lines 60 or so, noted that the process in the code already is for accessory apartments. Further, she noted that New York State town law does not require public hearings be held for site plan applications. Okay, that's good. And then we go down and I'm a little confused on I guess it's line 63.
Wait a
where
minute,
that-
I'm sorry.
Minutes.
And
Which
63
one are you reading from?
that she
Dick,
suggested.
which minutes are you reading from, Dick?
Oh, I thought we were on the last one, December 21st.
No, we're on December 7th right now.
Sorry, I have no comment on that one.
Okay. Anyone, any comment on that?
Nope.
If not, is there a motion to adopt those minutes?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
I,
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, terrific. The last set, Dick, are December 21. I think you have the question there. Page
And
4.
let
was
me
it?
make sure I have a question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I guess I don't have it on that page. On page 5, at line 52 and 53, Ms. Gray noted that the applicants need clear direction how to proceed in resubmissions. Also, she stated that if an application is what? Do you remember, Ms. Gray, what you had in mind?
I do not recall what
Read
the
it.
end of my sentence was there. I would suggest either Felicia check it or maybe we just strike that sentence.
Okay.
Write the
good.
sentence.
okay.
I mean, I could see how if you put a colon in,
Yeah.
then the first dot might be part of the colon, but
No,
Okay.
no,
Okay.
okay.
no, there's
We'll
something missing
remove
there.
it. Also, she stated that if an application is.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay. Well, all right. Then a minor one, since I'm on this one only, page 6, line 24. I think that Mr. Brownell stated his hope and take out would be and just say that Mr. Brownell stated his hope that more people would consider.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
All right. Now, down in line 55 and 56, we say encourage applicants to utilize the informal sketch meeting with the planning board. I thought that's with the planning board chairperson.
No, it's with the
Oh.
entire board.
Whole board.
The whole board? All right.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. That's it.
Okay, all set? Okay, with those amendments, is there a motion to adopt the minutes of December 21?
So moved.
Second.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Terrific, we're all set then.
Say, Bob,
And, yes, sir.
I'm a little suspicious of your background there. All those flowers behind you.
Yes.
Am I
Yes.
right that you have a tea time for a practice round in Augusta tomorrow?
No, those are natural Mount Kisco, New York daffodils.
I don't believe you.
They're
I'm
massive.
upset you didn't ask me to caddy for you.
Exactly. I can't afford you.
You're right about that. Besides, you'd have to carry me and your own bag.
Great. All righty, we're all set. So is there a motion to close the meeting?
Motion.
Second, all in favor? All
Aye.
righty.
Aye.
We'll see everyone in
Good night,
person in 2
folks.
weeks. Yep, good night now. Thank you.